In today's video, we have a variety of news to discuss, including some NHL trade rumors focusing on the San Jose Sharks and what moves they might be making this offseason. Plus, we have some updates on the Taylor Hall free agency talk. Where might he end up when next season rolls around? The New Jersey Devils have been doing some scouting for their next head coach and are looking at a European head coaching candidate. Plus, we also found out the results from the NHLPA vote on the playoff format involving 24 teams. Which teams said no to this format? We'll discuss that coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. Now, as I mentioned, we have a variety of topics today to discuss, so let's dive in and get started with the New Jersey Devils and some potential head coaching candidates. Of course, as we know, there's a few NHL teams that ended the season when it was paused that had a current head coach in an interim coaching position. So many of these teams are looking to decide on who will be the permanent head coach. Well, the guy they have in the interim spot remain, and of course, in the Devils' case, that's Coach Alain Nasreddine, who had been previously working with the Devils as an assistant coach. But it is believed that General Manager Tom Fitzgerald, who also has that interim tag attached to himself, has been working hard in interviewing several candidates as a potential permanent head coach for the Devils coming up here soon. Now, of course, Nasreddine is in the mix. It's not believed that he will not be the next coach, or at least permanent coach of the Devils, but he is looking at all other options. It's believed he's already conducted interviews with experienced NHL head coaches such as John Stevens and Gerard Gallant. Both could be, good fits for different reasons. Of course, Gallant will be one of the highly sought-after coaches, I think, when we finally hit the NHL offseason and we have a better landscape of which teams are going to need a new coach for next year. But the latest candidate they were looking to talk to was Rikard Gronburg, who is, of course, a well-respected coach over in Europe. The Swedish head coach has had a lot of success in the European leagues, currently coaching Zurich in the Swiss League, but he is under contract with that team for another season. He signed a 2-year deal. He's 1 year into that contract, and the Devils were denied the right to speak to him regarding their coaching position, but it doesn't mean they will give up pursuit. Depending on what they do, that maybe they'll reconsider this later on. I did see an article discussing the possibility, maybe if they really decide they really want to hire Gronburg, maybe they would offer Zurich some kind of financial compensation. Not really sure the Devils will go ahead and offer that, but it's certainly an intriguing possibility. I do think that there's plenty of other good options where they wouldn't have to do that, so that more likely wouldn't take place. But Gronburg's an interesting coaching candidate that has made it well known. His intent is to make the jump over to the top league, the NHL, the top league in the world when it comes to hockey, and it's no secret he wants to do that sooner than later. But in his last go-around at attempting to get an NHL job, that didn't work out, so he signed a 2-year deal with Zurich. So I guess we'll see if the Devils pursue him in the future or what other future NHL opportunities might await him and where they might head in the direction for their next head coach. If they decide to hire somebody else, like a Gerard Gallant, for example, or John Stevens, they're likely going to come with a 3 to 5 year contract to start things out. So that would likely get Gronburg out of the picture in the short term at least. So hard to say what that means, but the Devils are certainly exploring all their options while the NHL is on pause. Now, as we mentioned as well, we have some more updated information regarding the NHLPA's vote to accept the playoff format involving 24 NHL teams. Now, of course, the vote ended up being 29-2. How this worked is each NHL team, all 31, have a player rep, that's basically their union rep, who are attending all the meetings, gathering all the information, and would be voting on their behalf. Of course, as anybody who represents a group of people, their job is to not only give their own personal thoughts on the matter, but to be the voice of the entire group, of their entire team. And the teams that were revealed that voted no in this scenario was the Tampa Bay Lightning and the Carolina Hurricanes. There was some information floating around Twitter saying that the Penguins had voted no and that the player rep, Chris Letang, had leaked that information, but Letang has denied that. And if these other reports are indeed accurate, which I believe they would be, they're from reputable sources, that the Pittsburgh information was definitely not the case. It's Tampa and Carolina as the two teams that voted no. Now, I haven't seen quotes directly from Carolina or their player rep on the situation, but many believe that essentially the Canes were in a pretty good spot, would have made the playoffs anyway, and they just weren't fond of the idea of having teams who would not have normally been in the playoffs. Now, in Tampa's case, I was represented by Alex Killorn, is their team rep at the union. Killorn basically said that it was the collective voice of Tampa that they weren't happy with the format, but made it clear that Tampa and all of their players are very interested in wanting to return. That had nothing to do with not wanting to play. They just had concerns over the format. So when you hear these kind of reports, it's certainly, interesting to see different takes out there, but just because a team didn't want to go with a particular format doesn't mean they don't want to play. Essentially, Tampa would be one of the top 4 seeds. One of their concerns was that those teams would not be as ready when the round of 16 get underway. Obviously, the below 8 teams, so ranked 5 through 12, would have a full series already under their belt. Whoever they ended up playing, they just felt they'd be a little bit sharper and ready to go. And that the games that the top 4 teams were going to be playing against each other, they just wouldn't be as good of an option to prepare them for the next round. And that was their main concern. But like he said, he had no problem accepting the fact that majority won in this case, and that even though they voted no, and the majority voted yes, and they'll certainly proceed without any issue here moving forward with the current format. But as we also said before, this format has a few details to get tweaked out. One of the big ones will be whether or not they go with a bracket format or they go with their reseeding format once the play-in round is completed. If you saw my video I put out yesterday doing some playoff predictions, obviously that went with the bracket approach because that seems to be the format that the league seems to be pushing. But if you hear many NHL reporters and insiders on this particular issue, it seems like it does make a lot of sense for the NHL to go with a reseeding format. So essentially how that would work is you would have teams 5 through 12 play that first round, the play-in round, and then afterwards you take the top 4 teams and the 4 teams that won and reseed them 1 through 8 for the next round so that the top team is always playing the weakest opponent available. That would seem to be fair, and I can see the top 4 teams especially pushing for that option to make sure that they get the best options for them to be able to advance further into the playoffs, and they can avoid playing each other and as deep in the playoffs as possible. That will certainly make a lot of sense. And as we heard Sportsnet analyst Brian Burke talk about on Hockey Central, he made some good points that one of the main reasons that the NHL is really involved with the bracket approach and not the reseeding approach was to avoid a lot of potential crazy travel, and that's not going to be an issue in this scenario. Obviously, we're only going to be in a couple of remote hub cities. Teams will not really have a home and away advantage. Won't see any kind of travel really until potentially we get to the Stanley Cup Finals or the Conference Finals. Otherwise, they're going to be in set locations. At least that's what's believed to be taking place. So because of that, it only makes sense to go with the reseeding approach. The top team's the lowest opponent available to play each round that they keep advancing here. So I guess we'll see, but I know based on my predictions of the bracket approach, I looked at it again, and if I took all the winners that I predicted to win the play-in round, it would certainly create a fair bit of different matchups for the next round than I went through in my playoff prediction. So I very well might do another video with that different format, because that seems to be pretty likely that it could get voted in to go ahead. It certainly would create some different matchups and might change my opinion on some of the results, and therefore change my mind on who might win. So let me know what your thoughts are on which format you think they should go with. Should they go with the bracket approach like we see in more of an NCAA style, or should they go with the reseeding approach and every round reseed the team so that the top team plays the weakest team, and so on? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments, and we'll continue discussing further. Now, as I mentioned as well, I wanted to look at an article from NBC Sports Bay Area looking at some Sharks trade talk. Obviously, there's been lots of talk around different teams throughout this NHL pause, and the Sharks are no stranger to that given their lack of success this past season. Obviously, they're not going to have their first round pick, which went to Ottawa in the Erik Karlsson trade. So they're certainly going to be set back. They didn't have a whole lot of success this year, and they certainly need to make some changes. One of the articles I wanted to reference as well is another one in The Athletic, which is a Kevin Kerr's mailbag article. Both these articles talk about different players. The NBC Sports one talks about the backup goaltending situation and the fact that the Sharks really should let Aaron Dell go through free agency, find work elsewhere, and that they should consider making a trade for a more suitable backup, somebody who can be, a pretty reasonable contract, but also challenge Martin Jones in the starting role and hopefully take on more games. And they suggested talking to the New York Rangers about backup goaltender Alexander Georgiev. Now, of course, the Rangers have had a bit of a three-headed monster in goal between Henrik Lundqvist, Igor Shesterkin, and Georgiev, and many believe one of them will not be back for next year. Doesn't make sense for the Rangers to continue with those three guys, but we saw Igor Shesterkin get the bulk of the playing time, and he's clearly the goalie of the future. You could probably argue he's the goalie of the present as well. He's kind of stolen that job from both of those guys, and personally, I think he's definitely not going anywhere. It's 100%. I would not be surprised, though, if Georgiev remained with the Rangers as well, and that they find a way to move on from veteran Henrik Lundqvist. Now, he's only got 1 year left on his contract, so a buyout certainly is a possibility. Obviously, for him to be traded, he will have to accept and waive his no-trade clause, because that's certainly going to complicate things drastically with not being able to move him freely on their own. So there's that possibility that he could get moved with some retained salary. Maybe he gets an opportunity to go somewhere else, but he's made it clear before he wasn't really interested in moving on. But after last year and the lack of playing time, maybe Hank will change his mind and decide to ride out the last year of his career with another jersey and see what he can find. But the suggested package here to obtain Georgiev from the Rangers was his second-round pick. I'm not really sure that New York is going to go for that at all. I know based on the rumors leading into the trade deadline about what the Rangers were considering asking for Georgiev, it was much steeper than a second-round pick. Now, you can argue what you think is fair or not fair, but at the end of the day here, he's a good young goaltender, and regardless of where he fits on their depth chart and other teams, I don't think the Rangers are letting him go for a second-round pick. So, I mean, maybe they could offer somebody else or a different package, a little bit more compensation, but I'm not sure that they really want to go down that road. It'd have to be a pretty substantial offer, I think, before the Rangers would pull the trigger. I do think Georgiev would be great for the Sharks, don't get me wrong. He would challenge Jones for that starting role. It'd probably be good for his career to get more of an opportunity. But, at the same time, I can see why the Rangers would want to hang on to him and have a pretty terrific 1-2 punch for a long time, because him and Igor are running the show in Madison Square Garden. So I personally think he stays, and it's more likely they find a way to move on from Lundqvist. But I guess we'll see what happens in the offseason. Now, the other article here, like I said, in this Kevin Kerr's Athletic Mailbag article, was asked about the future of Thomas Hertl and if he sees him as maybe being a trade bait target to kind of improve other areas of the team. And he basically said that with Hertl's contract being pretty reasonable, he's still pretty young, and really he doesn't see him being a trade option. But one option he did see being on the table would be forward Kevin Labanc. Now, Labanc was a player who last year took a really sweet bargain contract for the Sharks, helped them out of a jam with their cap situation, signed a 1 year, $1 million deal as a restricted free agent, and now he's an RFA again, needs a new deal. But the only problem was this last year was not nearly as good for him as the year before, and he just lost a lot of his leverage on a new contract. So could we see him possibly be moved out instead? Now, he also has arbitration rights too, so certainly it is possible if they can't come to terms that they could get a contract settled through arbitration, but that quite often does do damages to the relationship between the player and the team, and it's hard to say how things would go from with that road. But the Sharks are in need, I think, of at the very least a bit of a reset or a shakeup. And clearly Labanc is a young player still with a lot of potential and might be able to bounce back with a bigger opportunity elsewhere. So it does make some sense that with him needing a fairly substantial raise, that he very well could be one of the players moved out. Now, if they offered up a guy like him for Georgiev, maybe it might be something more likely the Rangers will listen to. But the Rangers have such a deep pool of younger players already on their team, both amongst the forward group and the blue line. I'm not really sure what they would be looking for in that kind of trade. Labanc's an interesting option, but I guess we'll have to see what happens. But either way, I do see the Sharks making some moves, and I do think that the Georgiev deal, for example, is a good trade for them, but not sure that's something that they're going to be able to pull off. But let me know what your thoughts are down in the comments. Now, lastly here, I want to address Taylor Hall and some speculation around his future, and could he actually end up staying in Arizona? I mean, personally myself, I haven't had a lot of confidence in this and seen him moving on through free agency, but we have some recent comments here from Coach Rick Tocchet on an ESPN podcast suggesting he felt that they were still very much in the mix to retain Hall's services beyond the current season. Of course, in the current playoff format, Arizona would be in, so they'll get an opportunity to play some more games with Hall in their lineup. So I guess we'll see what kind of impression they can continue to make on him, and see how they do in this play-in round. If they can make it further, maybe that'll kind of sway him to want to stay. But they have some good goaltending. They do have some good pieces there, but I still think they're several pieces away from being a regular Cup contender. And he also talked about the contract possibilities. Rick Tocchet went on to say that obviously many players that are due for new contracts are in an awkward spot because of the pause and the pandemic kind of throwing a monkey wrench here at everything. Clearly it's going to have a lot of impact on what players can get on deals. He just doesn't see Taylor Hall being one of the guys that's going to say, you know what, I'll take a 1 year deal, take a bargain contract now, continue playing, and try to bounce back, have a better year myself, help the team, and get that longer term deal next year. Doesn't see that happening. He figures Hall's at a stage in his career where he wants that long-term stability, wants to settle down and work on getting himself into the playoffs on a regular basis and work towards getting that Stanley Cup that's eluded him so far. He has very little playoff action to his name. Obviously this year he'll have an opportunity to get some playoff action with the expanded format, so we'll see how that goes for him. So I do think there's a possibility he could remain with Arizona, but they're going to have to be very creative if they're going to keep him. The Coyotes are one of the teams with the worst salary cap situations right now in the league. They'd have to clear out a fair bit of space. We've discussed that before. I'm not really sure who would go to make room for Hall. Looking around at teams who would have room, Colorado, Montreal do stick out as a potential landing spots. I mentioned before that the Avalanche, I think, would be a great spot for Taylor Hall. I've seen Avalanche reporters indicate before they didn't feel that there was any interest from Sakic and the Avs to go after Taylor Hall, so we'll see if there's any truth to that. Montreal, of course, has had a hard time recruiting free agents, but they could certainly use another big-time scorer like Hall as well. They may prefer to go to a team that's a little bit more established as a regular playoff team where Montreal's building up to that. Not really sure, but I mean, he'd be a great piece there to really help them with their offense too. Same thing as well with the Calgary Flames. They would likely have to make some room and shed some other players, but we'll see how the Flames do in this expanded playoff format. But they're another team that's due for a shakeup, and maybe one of their top guys would go out, and a guy like Hall could come in and kind of go back to his Alberta roots and see if he can help that team get over the hump and make it further into the playoffs. But either way, he's going to be one of the most interesting guys to watch in free agency. Might not get the contract we thought he would get a year ago, but it's still going to be interesting times as we get through this NHL pause. Hopefully soon have an NHL return, and we're going to have a later than usual NHL offseason, but it's certainly going to be very interesting once we finally get there. So let me know your thoughts on everything we discussed here today, and we can discuss further down in the comment section. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and turning on your notifications so you don't miss any future content, and give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you for watching, and I will catch you next time.